Hi everyone, welcome to Simi Waters Life Coaching. Today I'm just going to continue from yesterday's discussion. I'm continuing yesterday's discussion on childhood emotional neglect. And yesterday we kind of introduced the concept of childhood emotional neglect and the fact that if you were emotionally neglected as a child, you will feel the effects in adulthood if you don't remediate those effects and fill in those gaps. In your emotions and in your way of thinking, your patterns of thinking in your subconscious, if that's not corrected, you continue to feel those effects. So today I'm just going to go into a little more detail into what emotional neglect is, and then I'm going to give you some signs, some things that you may be experiencing that's a sign that you missed out on really connecting with your caregivers at the time that it was crucial. Really those first 2 to 5 years of life where it's very crucial that a minimum amount of emotional connection exists between the child and the primary caregiver, usually the parents. If that's not there, if the minimum amount is not there, then you'll feel the effects in adulthood. And just a caveat, there are no perfect parents, there are no perfect caregivers. So everyone at some time or the other experiences some emotional neglect. Sometimes the parent is sick or, cranky or tired and doesn't give the child what they need, right at that moment. There are some times when a child is born and the mother is maybe in the hospital for a while after that. And so some neglect takes place just because of circumstances beyond the parents' control, or just because, the parents are not perfect. However, what we're looking for is not the perfection, it's not that the parent was there 100%, but that the minimum threshold of the child's emotional needs were met. So basically, I just want to give a definition of neglect, the word neglect itself. Neglect is a lack of attention to something, leaving something unattended, disregarding something, sometimes being careless with something that needed, to be taken care of. So neglect shows up when the emotional needs of a child, that emotional neglect, are not attended to with a lot of care, with a lot of attention, with a lot of regard as to the importance. And the truth is, emotional neglect really usually takes place because the parent didn't know. The large majority of parents know that they need to feed their children. So unless a parent is really just abusive, you will find that most parents will make sure every child gets 3 square meals a day. Mm-hmm. Most parents will make sure that their child is clean and bathed, has lotion on their body. Most parents will make sure that their child has medical care when the child is sick. Most parents will make sure that the child has clothing, appropriate clothing, and shoes on. That's all physical attention. And that's the one that's most obvious, because a child that's not fed becomes malnourished, they become really thin and sick. So the effects of neglect in the physical area is very obvious. You see it right away. This child is thin, their ribs are sticking out, they're not being fed. Or the child is sick, there's no medicine, nobody's taking them to the hospital, medical neglect. It's very, it's very obvious, it's out there. And so most parents, because most parents love their children, will make sure that gets taken care of. However, you have, if a parent was not raised with emotional attention or emotional care, or with a lot of regard given to the emotional state of the child, mm-hmm. The parent probably doesn't know that that's needed. The education, and that's one of the goals of this channel, is really to educate, as I became educated as an adult, as to the needs, my emotional needs and the emotional needs of my children, is really to spread the word that, hey, this is important. It's not just feeding, clothing, and sending them to school. That's not what matters. Because I grew up in a home where education was very important, very important. I mean, we got the best education possible. So there was no way anyone would have looked at my family and said, oh, these kids are being neglected, because we were clothed and we were fed and we were getting the best education. But emotionally, as I grew into adulthood, I began to find out that there were just some things that were hard for me. I'm looking at other people. This is not hard for this person. These people, they don't feel insecure when they're around other people. They have fun. They don't have trouble having fun, or, they don't feel so left out of stuff all the time. What's going on? Why do I feel this way? And the people around me don't feel this way. And I began to ask questions as to my experience versus other people's experiences. I realized that, hey, something was missing, So physical neglect is not as common. Well, it is common in certain situations, but it's easily identified and addressed. But emotional neglect is not as easily identifiable. It's like an invisible mist, and it's very subtle. And so you have to be present and conscious and mindful and thinking about, your experience and being self-aware as to what's going on with you to be able to identify whether or not you're experiencing emotional neglect. It's really a hidden issue. So looking back at your childhood, would be the place to start, and thinking back, what was missing? So not so much what was there, but what was missing. So you might look back and say, I went to school, my parents were good people. It's not so much that what they did, because if they abused you emotionally, then that's easy to identify. So if your parents were extremely harsh, cussed you out, called you names, called you an idiot, told you would never amount to anything, that's emotional abuse. So that's like you have emotional neglect, kind of like over here, and you have emotional abuse is like right here. And that's also more easily identifiable because it was what was done, but I'm trying to go down to the to the lower level. Let's start at the root level, because where there's emotional abuse, there will also be emotional neglect, which is why I'm dealing with emotional neglect first, because that's the bottom line. So one person may come from a home where the parents never called them names, the parents never said anything mean to them, but then that parent also never hugged them, never praised them, never spent time with them, never praised their achievements, never encouraged them, never comforted them when they were sad. The child was just left to do his own thing. You're just kind of left to the side. As long as it's fed and it's clothed and it's just sitting there, it's okay. So I want to start with emotional neglect, not emotional abuse, which is basically, so look back at your memories and ask yourself, okay, I see what happened. I see the things that I experienced. What were the things that I should have experienced that I did not experience with my parents? Was there an emotional connection in my childhood with my parents? Did I experience moments of connecting emotionally with my parents? Did I experience times when something happened to me and I was sad and my parents noticed? First of all, that would be the first thing. They would even notice that, you were kind of sad, you were down. And not only did they notice, but they did something about it. They identified, oh my gosh, my kid is sad about something. And they gave you a hug, or they talked to you about it, or they brought it into the open as an issue that needed attention. So that's basically what we're going to be looking at, is what was missing from your childhood. So you may be an adult, high functioning, have a job, have a family, you're very capable, but you feel unfulfilled, or not able to move forward in certain areas. And the problem with not identifying the childhood emotional neglect is that you'll blame yourself. You'll say, well, I had a good childhood. My parents gave me everything they could. Why am I this way? What's wrong with me? You start asking yourself, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Which kind of will keep you stuck, because instead of identifying what's missing in your heart and filling that hole, you'll just think that you're broken and that there's nothing, that can be done for you. So this is a really, really important, it's a really, really important issue. It's important to realize that you may not be the problem. You are responsible for dealing with it, if you're an adult, but it's not because you're broken. It's not because there's something wrong with you. It's because there's stuff missing. There are experiences that you should have had that you didn't have. And now you can give yourself those experiences right now. And you can ask for help from people around you to gain those experiences. You can talk to, a counselor, or you can talk to a friend, or you can talk to a spiritual leader about these things, people who are knowledgeable. Now, I'll say that the knowledge or the understanding of this is not very common. So chances are you're going to find that even when you talk to your spiritual leader or a counselor or a therapist, many of them may not really understand these concepts, unless they've been through it themselves and said, oh yes, I remember having to go through my childhood and think about what was missing and give myself those experiences of healing and, and approval and acceptance and comfort to be able to bring myself up to where I needed to be. So I would also be careful about choosing the person who helps you with this. The person has to understand exactly what you're trying to do. So I recommend you kind of go through the series of videos, get the knowledge, and then that way you're armed to find the people that can help you with it. So the signs that you may have been neglected when you were a child, and actually before I read those, because I mentioned spiritual leaders, and I'm a Christian, so my examples are going to be mostly Christian or from the Bible. There's a chapter in the Bible that actually mentions the expectation. A lot of people will read stuff from Proverbs about how to raise kids. We get the discipline part down, don't spare the rod, discipline your child, correct your child, etc. But that's only one side of parenting. And so when I was growing up, I received discipline, a lot of correction, and I appreciate the correction because I'm glad I didn't grow up to be a criminal. I grew up to be at least a reasonably responsible member of society. But what was missing from my childhood, so I got the Proverbs, child raising part. That part was given to me, when I needed it. But then there's the other part of raising children with love that isn't always talked about in churches. And so I want to read a couple of scriptures. They're both in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. Verse 7 says, "We were gentle among you, just as a nursing mother would cherish her children." So Paul's expectation of how a mother would treat her children would be that she would cherish them. So ask yourself, were you cherished as a child? It's very easy to cherish that tiny little baby when they're really small and, they don't push their parents' boundaries. But when you became 2, 3, 4, 5, when you started saying you didn't want this or you didn't want that to your parents, when your parents found out that you didn't want to do everything they wanted to do the way they wanted you to do it, did they still continue to cherish you as you grew older? When you were 8, 9, 10, 13, 14, 15, 16, did you still feel cherished by your parents? And so if you didn't feel like they felt you were completely valuable and completely approved of and completely loved as you got older, then you may have experienced some neglect of some affirmation that you should have received that you didn't receive. And then the second verse is verse 11, where he talked about the father. And he said, "We comforted and encouraged and implored you just as a father would his children." So I know most of you watching this video are from Nigeria, like I am. And I don't know how many fathers in our society, I know there are some, I actually know there are some, but percentage-wise, I'm not sure what the percentage is of fathers who would spend time comforting and encouraging and imploring their children. When there was a difference of opinion or when a child was going the wrong way, how were you brought back to the right way? Was it with comfort? Was it with encouragement? And so even biblically, there is an expectation of emotional care that children should receive. Not just discipline, emotional care. And it's very easy to hand out that discipline. It takes a lot more work to hand out that emotional care, especially if your parents didn't experience it. And I know the past generation of parents, I don't know how many of them actually experienced that emotional care from their parents. I don't believe that my parents received it from their parents, in the measure that they should have. So I understand where my parents were coming from when they didn't provide, what I felt, I should have gotten this. It's generational. If you don't experience it, you don't know how to give it, which is why to correct that cycle that just keeps going through the generations, to stop that cycle, you have to take the time to say, hey, I didn't get this, so I have to assume I'm not giving it to my kids. So I have to stop. I have to make sure I fill those holes in myself and then also pass on that emotional care to my children. So I'm going to go through some questions here where if you experience any of these, then this is the right series for you to keep on listening and learning and really hopefully gaining some comfort, that you're not alone in the things that you're experiencing. It's not just you. This is experienced by thousands, millions of people around the world, because we're all human, our parents are human, so that human experience is really very common. All right, so one thing you might experience is that when you're with other people, you just never feel like you belong. So you have friends, but when you're all together, you just kind of feel like you're the odd one out in the group. You feel like they're all experiencing some kind of community or enjoyment of the bond within the group, but that you're on the edge of that group. You just always see, it doesn't matter where you go, whether it's at church or at work, high school friends, college friends, you just always feel like you're on the edge. Or even sometimes when you're with your family. I remember feeling this really when I was younger. Like we would have like family reunions, so all the family would be gathered together with cousins, aunts, and uncles, and I just never felt like I belonged with them. I just always felt like there was, I don't know, this wasn't a part of what was going on. Even though I was participating in what was going on, I just felt like I wasn't a part of what was going on. So that's one. Another one would be that you find it difficult to express dependency on others. So you pride yourself on not relying on other people. And this is a very important one, because it's a direct correlation to not having your needs met as a child, which is you learn that other people were not meant to meet your needs. So you had to meet your own needs for yourself. And so it's uncomfortable for you to ask for help. It's uncomfortable for you to rely on other people. In fact, you feel bad and humiliated if you ever have to rely on other people. And I know I felt this a lot. I was always like, as an adult, I always felt like, okay, it's really good that I don't have to rely on other people for money or, things like that. I felt like it was a good thing, and so I never asked for help, because I figured I'm just supposed to take care of myself and take care of my stuff, have my act together, take care of my own business. And I never felt like people were interested in meeting my needs, because, as a child, I didn't experience any active interest in meeting my needs outside of just the basic needs that needed to be met. Okay, so, and because of that, you will also have difficulty asking for help when you need to. Yeah. So, okay, if someone's ever told you that you act like maybe you're a snob, or you're kind of distant from people, you're not warm or affectionate, or you're aloof or distant, if you've ever been, even though in your heart you're not being snobbish, but people have experienced you as being a snob or distant, then it might be because you're carrying that distance that was between you and your parents when you were younger. You're still carrying that with you in your body language and in your demeanor when you interact with other people. If you feel like you haven't accomplished the things that you had the potential to accomplish, so you're an adult at this point, maybe in your 30s, maybe in your 40s or beyond, and you just felt like, man, I had so much potential. How come I'm not able to use that potential? It might be because the affirmation that you needed deposited on the inside of you to be able to step out and take risks and do things with a lot of energy just wasn't there. So you're lacking that inner drive, that inner energy to go and get things done. Sometimes you want to be alone. You don't like being around people. This isn't something that I've experienced so much. I'm more of an introvert, so I do like being around people. But there are times when I want to be left alone. So that wasn't my experience, but it might be, your experience is that more frequently than not, you just want people to leave you alone. Another one is you may feel like you are not really what people think of you. So you do something and you do it well, and people, give you a compliment or they give you a positive affirmation of what you've done, but you feel like, if you really knew me, you would know that there's nothing to this. You would know that I didn't really do a good job. Or you have difficulty accepting compliments, or accepting praise, accepting a kudos for what you've done. And there's a word for it in psychological circles. It's called the imposter syndrome, where you feel like you're pretending to be somebody good. You feel like you're pretending to be somebody who's doing a good job. You feel like you're pretending to actually have achieved the things that you're achieving, even though you are achieving them, but on the inside, there's still that hollow feeling that, man, any day now, they're gonna realize that I really don't know what I'm doing. That's because that deposit of affirmation and security and self-esteem is missing. You may be uncomfortable when you're around other people. We talked about that. You have a really harsh inner critic. So the voice you hear in your head about yourself, about the way you look, about the way you do things, just about your life in general is very harsh. And so you judge yourself really, really harshly, even as you give others a pass for the things that they do. So you always feel like what you do is wrong and what other people do is right. When you compare yourself to others, you always feel like you are falling short of what should be done, and other people are okay, but you are lacking compared to them. You're not as beautiful as other people. You're not as, I don't know, you're just lacking in general around other people. Some people who experience this might find it easy to love maybe small children or babies. So if you're a mother, you find out that when your children were babies, you felt an emotional connection with them, but as they grew older, you lost that emotional connection. Or you like animals, but then you don't like people. So that also happens too, because comparing yourself unfavorably to people all the time makes you feel bad. So it's like, oh, well, animals never judge me. So you just feel like, oh, people are always judging you. You feel like people always look at you and see something negative. Then sometimes you might experience feelings that you don't understand. You might just be going about your day and then a negative feeling just comes over you. A feeling of anxiety or anger or irritability. You're just annoyed, you're just unhappy for no reason. And there's a word for this, which I talked about in the last video, complex PTSD. So the PTSD that people experience when they've experienced a car accident or war or a really traumatic event, the expression of it would be really overt. You'd be like, stuck, frozen, nightmares. But the people who experience complex PTSD from childhood neglect or abuse, the symptoms are much more subtle. You might just find yourself you might just smell something and it just makes you feel bad, makes you feel unhappy, makes you feel worthless or hopeless or despair. There seems to be no reason about it. Or there's some situations where you just feel a lot of anxiety in that situation. So some people get test anxiety, might come from a type of complex PTSD where you feel like, if I don't do well, somebody's going to judge me. It comes from feelings of being judged as a child. And now it's like, even though you're an adult and nobody's going to judge you, it's your business what you do. That text anxiety, comes back. So you might if you find yourself feeling unhappy for no reason, it's a flashback to feelings that you had when you were younger, but that you never received the comfort or the positive side to it. Another one is you really don't know who you are. You really don't, when people say, what are you feeling in this situation? You have trouble identifying what you're feeling. Everything is just, I'm either angry or happy or sad. You have 3 feelings. Everything lumps under those feelings. You might have trouble identifying what you like and what you don't like. You might just take your cues for what you like and what you don't like from other people. But you have trouble when you're looking at something by yourself, deciding whether you like it or you don't like it. So you don't really know who you are. You can't identify your own emotions. Your uniqueness is not within your grasp. What makes you unique? What makes you separate from other people? You don't have a lot of ability to identify that, your strengths, your weaknesses, your likes, your dislikes, in a way that differentiates you from others. You might not really be good at identifying that. Okay, we talked about feeling like you don't belong with other people. So sometimes you feel like life is just kind of passing you by and you're just looking at other people living their lives and you're not really living your life to the fullest. When you have trouble, like I know the Bible talks about when David lost his army, when he lost his needed, and he encouraged himself in the Lord. So you have trouble encouraging yourself. You have trouble, and I don't mean the encouragement ways. There's something called denial, where something happens and Christians will just be like, oh, that didn't happen in Jesus' name. I refuse to. I'm not talking about refusing to see what's really going on. I'm talking about when you see what's going on, you feel the unhappiness or the grief of what's going on, but you also have the ability to encourage yourself and give yourself hope in that situation. And we'll talk about denial. Maybe that may be the next video I do, which is talks about denial is one, or bypassing an issue, going around it, using cliches to go around an issue rather than actually facing the issue. But this is different. Just the ability to comfort yourself, to calm yourself down when you're angry or sad, you know, the ability to, I guess, basically be your own parent. To, you know, because what happens when, and I think I talked about this in the last videos, you're supposed to have absorbed both your parents' attitudes towards you. You actually do absorb your parents' attitudes towards you, and it's inside of you. So when you are upset or angry, if your parents calmed you and held you and comforted you when you were a kid, then when you are angry, upset, when you're an adult, you have the ability to calm yourself down and comfort yourself and give yourself what you need, or ask for help when you need it. So if you have trouble doing that, it means you didn't experience that as a child. Sometimes you may feel empty inside, feel like life is meaningless, feeling like, you know, there's just no meaning, you know, there's no joy, a numbness where you don't feel joy in situations where you should have joy, in situations that are good and everyone's having a good time, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be having a good time. You just feel like it's meaningless, you know. Sometimes you might feel like there's something wrong with you, like you're broken, like what's wrong with me? Why can't I get it together? I mean, that was kind of like my experience was always like, oh, why can't I just get it together? Just get it together, you know? And so that's also a sign. And if you, in that process of trying to get it together, you find that you struggle with procrastination, you struggle with inaction, not being able to take action, not being able to take risks in business or at work, being self-disciplined, being consistent on the things you want to do. Some of those things come from childhood emotional neglect. And so that's about, I don't know, 20 to 25 questions in there. And really, when I look at my life, I probably struggled with, I don't know, 18 or 19 of these. So almost all of these were a part of my experience as an adult. And so I know, I have to go back and check my childhood and see what was missing and begin to work to put those things back into my own life so that I can feel the void. I can experience life even as an adult. I don't have to, sit around blaming my parents and saying they didn't do this. I can do it for myself. I can, be responsible for my own experience now that I'm grown, and I can take responsibility for it. So go over those questions, kind of see where you're at, and if you think you've experienced some childhood emotional neglect, then there will be more videos coming with tips and things that you can do to change that experience and actually begin to kind of let go of some of those burdens, let go of some of that baggage, and fill yourself with things that are positive. Deposit encouragement and edification into your own heart. Remove the judgment, remove the criticism, remove the anger, so that you can have a more positive experience going forward. So thanks for joining me today. I'll have another video for you tomorrow, and we'll all keep getting healthier and better together. Take care.